literally everything that we have today, right? And I think I had a more detailed presentation and discussion around what is missing in my framework. So, there is another presentation and you may want to just have a look at it. But I'm just going to kind of give you a very quick insight to it. Now, what has happened in the last 40, 50, or last 80 years or so, right? Most of the frameworks that you see, whether it's a management framework, strategy framework, business process frameworks, right? And what we did was we created a lot of these. All these frameworks has some great ideas, some checklists, some best practices, and we created these Excel files and Word documents and PowerPoint files, expecting with a strong expectation that these are going to help me to address one of these problems that I, or the opportunities which is listed down, right? And year after year, decade after decade, we have found that people have just failed to connect. It might work for the first 8 months, right? But as soon as you go to the third year and fourth year, all these these problems kind of reoccur, and these content were not available, not possible. And then what we found that in the last 20 years or so, we saw an emergence of in a more mainstream enterprise architecture discipline. Now, the idea was similar, right? And instead of creating those Excel and PowerPoint stuff like that, we started creating more technical content, network diagram and data diagrams and UI diagrams and functional diagrams. The expectation was exactly the same, right? All these diagrams which we create, they should help me to answer these questions and solve these problems and address to these new opportunities, manage the changes quickly, manage the complexity very fast. And guess what happened? Collection of all these put together, being in the mainstream market for the last 20 years, you'll find that year after year, company after company, industry after industry, CEO after CEO, CIO after CIO, right? Just not working. And this is where I'm just going to kind of ask you to just kind of slow down, just spend some time and find out why did it work for 12 months and then it starts to break by the time we go to 24 months and 36 months, because eventually everything that we thought was a great has a fundamental problems, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more on that, right? And what were those missing things? What are those basic problems? And let me tell you, in order to understand that, first we have to understand that unfortunately most of these frameworks, or the genesis of this framework, can be attributed to the individuals and individuals' ability to comprehend complexity inside their brain, right? So they could kind of figure out all these pieces. Okay, this is where my function is, this is where my data are, there's my network, this is my customers are, there my processes is, and they kind of figured it out because they spent 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And using that knowledge, they kind of put together some formal structure around it, and they try to use it. That's pretty much good. But I tell you what was wrong with that, or what is wrong with this, is basically that when you are creating a framework, right? Or when you're now imagine, it took nearly like 200 or 300 years by the time we had Newton talking about gravity and Wright brothers making a use of that theory into something which is practical. In other way, we have to allow a certain number of time to see whether these ideas live, right? Because only if the ideas live for more than 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you know that those ideas have a solid reasoning, solid basis. And this is exactly where you'll find that almost everything that we have today, it fails. So the one problem that we find is that most of these ideas are basically embedded inside the brain of the individual. And the second biggest challenge that I see, that in the name of architecture, we create a lot of different diagrams and different content in different formats, on a Word document, an Excel, Visio, and everything. Now, so you got a lot of these ideas inside the brain, or if you don't, and a lot of these content and ideas and descriptions outside one of these documents. Now, the question happens is, how do you use this? Because you will agree that by the time you create, it takes a lot of time, and by the time your system is ready to change, these are outdated. And this is the major reason why you would find that in the last 40 years, even the biggest of the enterprises and the CEOs had to resign because in absence of understanding of the enterprise anatomy, their inability to reorganize or recreate another enterprise from the existing set of assets or enterprise elements and assets, and reorganize the enterprise to deliver new and different and better services and customers on a regular basis. So right now, the whole enterprise is like a huge monolithic system, which nobody seems to understand. So the everything that so what we really have to understand is, why did we do it? And I'll tell you why did we do it. Because we use almost everything that you saw in the 2 or 3 slides back, right? So that means everything that you see here right now in my presentation, all the list of framework, whether TOGAF, DODAF, FIAF, RM, ODP, or everything, or you see even more than 800, 900 going around, I think around 980 or something like that, strategy and business process frameworks, right? And everything that you see here, all these are basically created by individuals, right? As they have tried to work on a couple of projects, right? So that they tend to create a hypothesis driven by their own project experience. They create a methodology about how did they deliver the solution. They tend to create a list of artifacts which they felt were useful. They create do's and don'ts, and they create a checklist and create a certification and bells and so on and so on, right? And then guess what happens? What we discount in this whole thing is the existence of the natural design elements. And what it basically, the whole hypothesis is that that set of people with 5 or 10 projects are they're trying to derive the entire basis of the enterprise, right? Which basically takes around 25 years to even understand. And this is where the most of the the effort that we even today with your digital enterprise efforts, digital services efforts are going to become monolithic and legacy very quickly, because you are applying certain thoughts and thought processes which are created by individual, and it's driven by their own personal experience, right? And no matter how much you try to distribute this body of knowledge to how many people, the result will be same. And what is that? They will be not able to handle the complexity beyond certain level. And let me explain you that with some more simple example.